It gives me great pleasure to introduce Peter Duffy. He is the commercial director of EasyJet, based in Luton. He has been in that post for 3 or 4 years. And as you all know, even if you are from outside Europe, EasyJet is one of the most dynamic airlines operating in Europe and probably flies to every European airport that is represented here at this conference. Peter, perhaps you could tell us, for those who are not from Europe, a little bit about the size and spread of EasyJet.
So EasyJet, I think, is 22, 23 years old now. We're Europe's 4th largest airline, so we have 280 planes. We fly from 28 bases now. We've just opened Bordeaux into 31 different countries, about 880 different routes. At the moment, we're flying about 80 million passengers a year. As our Air Berlin transaction finishes, that will take us up to 90 million.
Those 80 million are all within Europe, except for some Egypt.
Broadly, so there's a bit of Israel, a bit of Northern Africa.
So in terms of inter-European traffic,
about
what
9%,
share?
About 9% of the market.
So 9% of the market.
Yeah.
So you're bigger than Lufthansa in terms of purely inter-European
So in
traffic.
terms of short haul, essentially it's us and Ryan who are the two significant players.
But you have a different network strategy from Ryanair.
Yeah, so we go to primary airports. So we go to what we would describe as the airports customers want to go to. But we try and take them there in the most efficient way that we can.
You mean Ryanair takes passengers to airports they don't want to go to?
Well, what I mean is that if you're coming to Paris, we'll take you into Charles de Gaulle as opposed to Beauvais. So that in turn obviously means that we pay higher charges because a number of those airports are regulated. Our prices can be a little bit more, but for the consumer wanting to get to the place they want to get to, it's extraordinary value for money.
All analyses I've seen comparing you to Ryanair suggest that your costs per seat are about 30 to 40% higher. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Why are you unable to get your costs and therefore your fares down to the same levels as?
I think that there's 2 significant dimensions to that. So it's not unable, it's what is the right level of cost for the business model we have. So of course flying into major airports means that we're flying into more regulated airports, which means that the costs of those airports are more expensive, as already touched on. Equally, another important and different dimension to our business model is that we employ people locally. So we pay our local social taxes. We respect local unions. So with Air Berlin, we've just done a deal with Verdi in Germany, for example.
So you're saying Ryanair escapes a lot of social costs?
Well, I'm not saying anything about Ryanair. I'm telling you what we do and why that kind of works in their way.
Very smart.
They can decide to do it their way. We'll do it our way. So I think they're probably the 2 significant reasons: the nature of the airports we fly to and the nature of the employment model.
Now, an exciting new development for you is that you're buying 25 aircraft from Air Berlin and using them at Tegel. Can you tell us what's the logic behind that?
So we're the number 1 airline now in London, in Geneva, in Milan. We're number 2 in Paris, in Amsterdam, a number of different cities. And so we talk about what we call purposeful growth. So we know that we're successful where we're the number 1 airline in a market, or we're the number 2 behind a weak legacy. So what we mean by number 1 is by essentially volume of customers, so volume of routes, thickness of schedule, just the scale of the operation there. And that is where we are at our most successful. So take London Gatwick, take Geneva, take Milan Malpensa as examples for that. But we're also very successful where we are number 2 behind, as I say, a weaker legacy carrier. So what Air Berlin gives to EasyJet is the opportunity for us to be number 1 in the Berlin market, which we will become. Whilst Tegel stays open, then we have a very strong position within that airport. If that does close and concentrates into Brandenburg, then obviously we will begin to bring our operation at Schönefeld and Tegel essentially together. So it makes real sense for us to take a major position in what is, I think, the 3rd biggest market in Europe. It's a growing and a dynamic city. It's got huge amounts of travel into and out of. And we really see it to be a massive centre of growth.
And
for
Tegel
ourselves
has a
going
particular
forward.
advantage because it's proximity to the city.
Well,
I've been invited 3 times to the opening of Brandenburg,
Yeah.
which has never happened.
Well, I
I'm
think it's always
waiting
a
for the 4th invitation.
I think it's always
for
a
the
rolling
opening.
2 years away. So yeah. So, but I mean, either way, the operation will kind of come together. But if I look at a number of cities, we do have strong positions in where they have multiple airports in both airports. So London's a good example where we're strong in Gatwick, but we're also strong in London Luton as well.
Rumours have it that you're also bidding for bits of Alitalia.
Well, I mean, I think we've said that we've made an expression of interest, but we can't really talk much more about that because that's a process which is open and live at the moment.
Okay, but what bits of Alitalia would you want?
So that's what I said. We can't say much more about it.
Okay, well, let's go back to Tegel because you've got 25 aircraft. You've got a lovely city centre, almost airport. Will you fly those aircraft on the routes that Air Berlin are flying them on, or will you fly different?
So if you add the 25 that we're getting from Air Berlin with the 12 we already have in Schönefeld, we'll have just under 40 as a sort of starting point for this new operation. We'll go to the places where customers want to go to. So one of the reasons that we're successful is that we are absolutely responsive to consumer demand. And part of the dynamism of our business is that if routes don't work, then we are brutal in our approach to cutting them. So we will give an opportunity for any route to mature, but if we don't see it hitting its critical success criteria, then we will look to change that. So really we'll develop the easyJet network that Berlin needs rather than just take on what's historically existed.
So if there's an airport here that would like a Berlin flight, they should get in quickly and convince you that they've got the passengers.
We're always happy to chat to airports.
Happy to chat to airports, there you are. Now, an interesting development in the last 2 years has been the very rapid expansion by Norwegian of long-haul, low-cost operations out of Europe, mainly across the Atlantic, but also going to Asia. Why hasn't easyJet gone into the long-haul market?
Because we see huge opportunity in short haul still. So I think it's a very different model to what we do. So if you look at the way our business works today, essentially all easyJet crew come back to their home base. Every plane comes back. So really it's very rare for anybody to be overnighted at any point. If you look at how the planes are spec'd, we have a maximum sort of flying time really of 4.5 hours. If you look at what we've done in terms of gauge, in terms of how the in-flight offering work, that's all about aligning us to a short-haul market. And I do think then that long-haul is something that is very different to that. And so rather than trying to establish a new business and a new different sort of business, we're just focusing on what is still a huge opportunity within short-haul Europe to begin to fill the gaps that aren't adequately served by existing provisions. So we don't see any need to do that. What I would say we have done, though, is launch something called easyJet Worldwide.
I'll come on to that. Can I leave that for a moment?
Yeah.
I've got that to ask you about. But the implication of what you're saying is that, in a way, you're not convinced that long-haul low-cost could be profitable.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's probably not right for our organisation now in terms of the objectives we have. We can, we've probably got another 20-odd planes coming this year, which is all about establishing, strengthening these positions that we have in Europe.
But you've got 45 more planes because you've got the Air Berlin ones.
Before the Air Berlin. So, but I mean, the Berlin stuff is very specific to Berlin, clearly. Which is all about establishing these number 1 positions, number 2 positions right across Europe. And so the organisational focus is all about that rather than diverting ourselves into trying to do something new and different.
In 2 years ago, in your financial year 2015, easyJet made a profit of nearly, before tax, of nearly £700 million sterling. In the following year, 2016, it was about 450 million. In other words, a drop of 200 million. Your results for this year, your year finishes in September, will be out in 2 or 3 weeks. The analysts, I know you can't comment on it, are expecting somewhere in the range of 425 to 475 as your profit before tax. So you've gone backwards in terms of profitability from 700 million 2 years ago. You're now down 200 or 300 million. What's gone wrong?
So I think well, I don't think it's gone wrong. I think this is a cyclical industry, and we're at a certain point in the cycle. So I think there have been two significant headwinds for us. One is currency. So particularly if you look at what happened after the UK voted for Brexit, there was a significant shift in exchange rates, and that has cost us well in excess of £100 million. I think
Sorry, can I just clarify? It's cost you because of the revenue loss or because of passenger loss?
Just because of the effect that currency has on the business in terms of how currency works. No, there's been no passenger loss. What you've also seen, I think, over the last 2 years, which is a function of where fuel prices have been, are inefficient carriers essentially staying in the market and expanding capacity at a rate which is unsustainable and is now, with recent events over the last few months, proven to be unsustainable. And the effect that that has had on yields has been dramatic in terms of the prices which we're able to achieve for the routes that we fly. So you've had two sort of very big impacts, really. You've had excess capacity, which is driving down prices, and you've had specific headwinds from currency, which have been the major drivers.
Let's come back to this question of capacity, because, of course, in the last few months, we've had Air Berlin collapse, Monarch collapse, Alitalia collapsing. What has been the impact of that on your performance and your yields? I mean, have we gone through a downturn and coming into an upmarket situation now?
Well, I do think this is a significant inflection point in the industry. So essentially, economics always wins, and this is a business which I see to be fundamentally just driven by basic economics. So what you saw is an oversupply, which was driving prices down. If you take Monarch flying out of the UK, that's 7 million seats. If you look at what had happened with Monarch in the couple of years before their demise, they had really concentrated all that capacity into traditional Western European destinations, which had really had a big impact in terms of the prices overall. So that coming out of the market is significant. If you look at Air Berlin in a similar way, across the German market, that was obviously a very big player, so big capacity kind of coming out. I think with Alitalia less so at the moment, because obviously they've got the money that they have to continue flying, so that capacity hasn't shifted. But essentially, once capacity comes out of the market, if it does come out and stay out of the market, then that does have an overall impact on you.
But a lot of the planes that were flying for Air Berlin have now been bought by Lufthansa and have been put into their low-cost airline, Eurowings. So isn't that a real threat to you now?
So that's what we're saying about capacity coming out. So how long does that capacity stay out for? And how does that capacity compete with us in terms of head-to-heads from individual airports that we fly from? So, one of the things I don't always agree with, that if you look at the analyst community, they see it as market to market. What we find is that catchment area is very important for an airport specifically. So people do have a preference for their local airports, and so it only really matters if it's broadly coming head-to-head with us in a very significant way. So it depends where that capacity re-lands, but at the moment that capacity is out of the market.
And you're not expecting Eurowings to attack you in your big markets?
Well, Eurowings will be a very significant player in Germany, and I expect they'll be a significant player in Berlin, but they have a different cost base to us, and I'm very confident that we compete effectively with them.
When you say different cost base, it means higher costs.
That's being polite, really.
That's really what you're saying. You're saying that you don't expect a low-cost airline run by Lufthansa to achieve the same cost levels as you are.
Well, what I'm saying is that we're very focused on our cost base and passing that value on to the consumer.
Okay.
And
talking about the consumer, you mentioned worldwide by EasyJet.
Yeah.
Perhaps explain what that concept means.
So I think this is genuinely exciting. What we're trying to do is to use technology to begin to step change traditional legacy models of interlining. We're creating essentially a marketplace where we link our short-haul network with that of longer-haul providers. So we've launched it, and we use airports, actually, the innovation of airports, particularly starting with Gatwick Airport, who are, I think, very innovative, to begin to kind of link together the ground operation on behalf of the customer. So this is something which a legacy airline would have done themselves previously, and now it's essentially three parties who are doing it. There's us, there's a long-haul carrier, and there's the airport. So the first phase of that is to create what will be in time a marketplace where a consumer can buy a flight from one of our easyJet departing airports right the way through to the long-haul destination. And as part of that, they buy the Gatwick Connect product, which does the ground handling at Gatwick for the interconnection. So
explain what does ground handling mean?
So a customer checks in the usual way with easyJet. They pick their bag up off the carousel. Within the baggage hall, there is a desk saying Gatwick
So
Connect.
they go from Edinburgh to Gatwick, pick up their baggage at the carousel.
They take it straight over to the Gatwick Connect's desk in the baggage hall. And then they say goodbye to their baggage again. And then they go out and recheck themselves in through Fast Track. And then there's a guarantee to that product that if there's any delay, then the port will begin to manage the customer onto the next available flight, with whichever carrier. So they provide some consumer guarantee and some consumer.
So the airport takes the cost and the risk of handling the transfer and the delays arising.
So the airport is sorting that out on behalf of the customer. And what was fascinating was the first flight we booked was from Nice to Fort Lauderdale. I don't know why that surprised me, but it did surprise me, really. It was a non-served route. It was the customer a non-served route on that day, the customer kind of creating a connection that hadn't worked, that wasn't available previously. And we know that we have 70 million customers who are essentially leaving our airports, going on to a long-haul destination. So we think there's a very significant market we can begin to tap into there. And the way we see this ultimately working is Gatwick is our first partner airport, but as we begin to expand that out with other airports, so I don't have an airport to talk about yet, but let's say Airport B, there could be a flight from Edinburgh to New York, and what we'll have is the price routing via Gatwick, the price routing via Airport B, the price routing via Airport C. So essentially we'll create a marketplace. And very shortly we're looking to surface all of that onto Google Flights as well. So the consumer will then see that in a very transparent way against all the other long-haul offers and legacy interlined offers.
So basically you're converting yourselves into a feeder for long-haul operations.
But importantly, what we're not doing is changing our model in terms of how that works.
Because the airport takes the cost and the risk of the transfer.
Yeah, so we need airports to be innovative and to kind of work with us and to think about this. But obviously, there's a revenue stream for them in doing this as well, not just from the attraction of the interconnectivity, but also from the passenger in terms of how that's all funded.
And how much, I presume it's public knowledge, how much does the passenger have to pay Gatwick Connect for that?
I think it's £19 a passenger.
19?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that's quite low.
It's quite low. And if you look at the total value that's then surfaced, so you take a customer who is flying from Edinburgh to New York and they're going with us and with Norwegian, that total package price is very competitive. But a lot of this isn't just about competing with existing legacy, it's just opening up new opportunities which don't exist today.
easyJet, Edinburgh, Gatwick, Norwegian.
And then Norwegian picked that up, or WestJet picked that up, and we're talking to a number of very significant airlines at the moment, and I'm hoping that we're going to have some very exciting breakthrough partners to announce.
So the other airports where you have a high or a good network of low-cost carriers are Geneva, Berlin, Malpensa. So you'd like to develop it at those airports?
Well, clearly. So we'd like to develop it at any airport where we have a significant flow of passengers coming in. But really, for an airport, it isn't that complicated to do. So even if our network isn't as big as the ones that you described, there is probably still value in opening it up if they have some long-haul traffic going in.
Now, I'd like to ask you one or two questions about Brexit, not about whether it's going to happen, but the aviation aspect of it. We had a speaker here earlier this morning who showed that potentially easyJet has 45 to 48% EU ownership. You need to be an EU designated airline to fly out of Berlin, for example. How are you going to tackle that problem?
So easyJet is a group of 3 airlines now. So essentially we have our UK AOC, we have our Europe AOC, and we have our Swiss AOC. And so in setting up the European AOC in Vienna, what we've done is secure our intra-European traffic, essentially.
Well, you don't do that because the AOC doesn't give you nationality.
Well, let me come on to that. So it's an airline group of 3, like many airlines, of sort of 3 kind of companies sitting underneath that. We are confident that the UK will negotiate a bilateral with Europe. I think everybody wants that to happen. I think all the European carriers are, which means that the whole flying program that we have will be secure. And in terms of ownership, I think those numbers aren't quite right, and we are very confident that we'll be a European airline and we can fly.
But you need to be a European airline to fly within Europe and a UK airline to fly out of the UK. Mm-hmm. How are you going to manage?
Well, we'll have to work that out, Rigas, but we're very confident we're going to be in that position.
Okay. Are you confident that Ryanair and the others who have similar ownership problems will resolve them?
I have no views on our competition. I don't spend any time thinking about their ownership structures at all. I just worry about my own.
But basically you're saying you think that a UK-EU aviation agreement is inevitable, irrespective of what happens as far as trade and the customs union?
I think so. I think it's just got to happen. I don't see. I'm not feeling any barriers to that being established by anyone really, and so it's in everyone's interest for that to continue. I'm sure that it's a question of time and going through the motions to get us there.
You fly from the UK to Morocco,
yes,
and that is governed by the EU-Morocco agreement. Mm-hmm. Presumably, where that happens, you're going to have to renegotiate, or the UK government's going to have to renegotiate some bilateral agreements with countries outside.
Well, let's see how all of this works. So, we're not unique as an industry in having specific issues which will need resolution through this kind of process. And there's a lot of talk about transitionary periods. Let's see how it will work.
Why did you set up an AOC in Austria rather than Malta or Cyprus or Finland, or what's the attraction of Austria?
Well, I think Austria Control is a very good regulator. I think they have very high standards, very consistent with the CA. Not to say that those standards don't exist anywhere else, but we could see that there was a kind of a real consistency really with the regulation that we had had previously, and just through a process we went through, a very rigorous process we went to, it just made absolute sense that we went there.
There are a lot of airport operators, investors, and finance directors here. What do you want from an airport as EasyJet? What is your ideal airport?
Our ideal airport, blimey. So I think it has to start with a really good customer experience. We have a program called Airport of the Future, actually, which is how we see an airport beginning to develop. And actually, we've done a lot of work with London Gatwick on that. So there are a number of components to that. So number one is actually the airport thinks about things from a consumer's perspective and certainly looks at its audience flows. It's something I worked in automotive, I worked in banking, and we spent a lot of time actually thinking about how those consumer environments practically worked. And I don't always feel that airports quite do that in the same way. And so with Gatwick, we spent a lot of time just looking at how customers actually flow through the airport and how that can be designed to work in the most seamless and frictionless way for the customer, and how we can begin to use technology to be able to aid them to do the things that they want to do. So, just a few examples of that really. Number one is at Gatwick now there's the biggest auto bag drop in the world. It's a one-stop auto bag drop. And I think it works brilliantly for us. I don't know if there's anyone from Gatwick here, actually. It works brilliantly for us, and it works brilliantly, I think, for them, because essentially it's a brand neutral environment. It's a big sort of white room that is all digitally enabled for branding. So when our first wave goes out, it's completely orange, and it's a sea of EasyJet. Once our planes leave and WestJet take over at sort of 9:30, a massive chunk of it becomes turquoise, and WestJet takes over. And these auto bag drop machines have taken our queue times at Gatwick down from something which was at times could be 35, 40 minutes to something less than 5 minutes. And I think
that's just for the bag drop.
That's just to drop the bag, but in the customer process, that is the most significant moment of dissatisfaction for them. And I think our worst points were kind of less than 8-10 minutes this year in terms of how big those queues are. And that's because we've just got 60 desks open at any point in time, and customers can begin to self-manage, and they can see them, and there's no sort of queue management required. It means that we staff now on a sort of 1-to-4, 1-to-6 ratio, depending on what's kind of going through. It works for everybody. It's just highly efficient. And I contrast that then with some of our other airports, which are still sort of devoting check-in space to individual airlines with fixed signage above, and there's us potentially with a significant percentage of our airport's traffic crushed into one corner, and our customers are just walking past empty desks. It just feels like that all needs reinventing. I think the next thing we're interested in is how we use biometrics to begin to just aid the customer through the airport journey. So how does technology just begin to keep them moving? I think that's great for the airports because it's taking the customer into the retail space, the F&B space. So it makes absolute sense for them to begin to do it. And it just provides us with an opportunity to give a really frictionless experience. So we're doing lots of work on biometrics and understanding how we can kind of keep that happening. I mean, I know...
But that's the future, isn't it? What about...
Well, no, I don't think it is the future now.
What should happen in Mykonos or Santorini, where...
Greek airports are a bit different, so we can talk about that.
Well, the people who run the Greek airports now are here, so there's an opportunity.
Let's talk about that in a second. But I think for very big airports, I think to look at how you get those traffic flows and how that happens in a very efficient way. And also, obviously, our business is all about turning the planes quickly, and so it's about airport services that enable that to happen as well. So, how we just have digitized runway management, how all the ground stuff can work seamlessly so we can turn the planes and get them gone. In terms of Greek airports, do you want to talk about Greek airports?
Yes, definitely, because the people who run them or who have just taken over are here.
Okay, so I mean, I think the great thing about the Greek airports is there's more consumer demand than we are able to essentially satisfy. And so if we could increase capacity, and that's in its broadest form, not just in the airports, but actually also with the airspace. So I guess what I'm saying is efficient capacity. So if we can kind of minimize delays in peak summer because we've got capacity to fly in whichever way, whether that's slot management or whether that's within the airports, I think there's a significant opportunity to increase that. There's a significant opportunity to go into the shoulder periods as well. But we just need a step change in capacity.
The one thing you haven't mentioned that you want from airports is low charges.
Of course. Well, the customer wants low charges. It's not us wanting low charges. So what happens if we can pass value onto the consumer, then we will drive more volume. So one of the things I think we've been able to do successfully is work with airports in terms of helping them reduce their overall costs so we can pass that on to the consumer. Essentially, that's the easyJet story. We have revolutionized travel by reducing the price and increasing the volume. That's what we do.
But I'm still focusing. Had I asked Michael O'Leary what he wants from airports, he would have said the first thing he wants is low charges or the airport to pay him for flying in. You answered by saying we've got biometrics and baggage handling and so on. In reality, how critical is the airport charge to you to fly into, we were talking about regional airports earlier on, about a regional airport rather than a major airport?
So the price is absolutely critical because the price determines what the consumer is going to pay. And so the level of demand into any airport is a function of how expensive it is for the customer to begin to get there. So if we can begin to, we can create demand by essentially offering the consumer fantastic value to begin to go there. And the consumer then begin to trade off different destinations versus each other. So yes, it is fundamental, but not at the cost of a decent experience. And I think every consumer would tell you they want to go to an airport that works. So we have a number of airports where that experience hasn't been optimal, and we've had to spend an awful lot of time to begin to work with them on it, because if that capacity isn't there, if that infrastructure isn't really there for the consumer at the scale and quality it needs to be, then it doesn't work.
And an airport that works means not just the airport, it means the immigration, the security services, the road access, everything.
It is fundamentally, a number of those things are very difficult to begin to achieve, but within the gift of this community here, there's an awful lot of progress that could be made.
You've given us, Peter, great insight into EasyJet. Thank you very much for coming away from Luton to Paris. I know you're not staying long. You've answered our questions very honestly, very directly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Rigas.